Viv's thanks to you all for joining us. It's really inspiring to see so many of you and how seriously this issue is being taken. So we're really encouraged by that. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the key findings from the report that we've launched this morning. So I hope you can all see that okay. So all of the statistics you're about to hear are the results from a survey carried out by YouGov in collaboration with AdFam earlier this year. So they're based on a sample size of over 2,000 people, and the figures are weighted and representative of all adults in Great Britain. So 2 years ago, we ran our first survey with YouGov, which told us that an estimated 1 in 10 adults in Great Britain, 5 million people, were currently negatively affected by the substance use of a family member or friend. So obviously that's a huge number of people. And this provided the evidence for our Forgotten 5 Billion campaign to make the case that despite the scale of this problem and sheer number of families that are affected by this issue across the country, that it doesn't get the recognition or attention that it deserves in terms of public awareness and policy making. It's really important that we continue providing evidence that's up to date and accurate. And that's why we've commissioned this new survey to achieve exactly that. This time, in addition to focusing on those that are affected by the drinking or drug use of a family member or friend, we are also including those that are affected by gambling. So our first question was simply asking how many people are affected by or coping with a loved one's drinking, drug use or gambling. And the figures largely correspond with what we found before. So 2 years ago, we found that 5 million people were currently negatively affected by someone else's substance use. This time we broke it down specifically into the different issue, including gambling as well. So 4 million adults in Great Britain, we estimate to be currently negatively affected by the alcohol use or drinking of a family member or friend. 3% affected by drug use, so that's 1.5 million adults, and 2% gambling. So many of these as well are affected by more than one issue. So combining the overall number, that makes 11%, 5.5 million adults in Great Britain to be currently negatively affected by the drinking, drug use or gambling of a family member or friend. So this is obviously a huge number of people, and we feel that it simply doesn't get the recognition or attention that it deserves. So we also asked about how long these family members and friends had been coping with these issues and the duration of that behaviour. And 34% said that they have been negatively affected by a friend or family member's drinking, drug use or gambling for more than 10 years, and 27% between 4 and 10 years, meaning that 61% have been affected for more than 4 years. And 36% of those 36% of families are currently living with the person who drinks, uses drugs or gambles. So in particular, if you think during the pandemic, that really kind of shines a light on the number of people that have suffering the intensity of supporting a loved one with a substance use or gambling problem. We also wanted to explore the impact of the pandemic on family members. And 41% of the people surveyed said that the pandemic had made their family member or friends drinking, drug use or gambling more challenging to deal with 22% saying much more challenging and 19% a bit more challenging. A quarter of families said that their loved ones drinking, drug use or gambling had become a problem in the first instance during the pandemic, and over a third said that their loved ones drinking, drug use or gambling had increased during the pandemic, with 12% experiencing a relapse. Nearly half of families said that the pandemic had strained their relationship with their loved one, and a third of families said that their mental health had suffered. 18% said that they were feeling more isolated, and 31% said that they had found it difficult to speak with or see the person with the substance use or gambling problem as a result of the pandemic. We also wanted to explore the impact on the working life and opportunities of family members. So just over a third of people reported that their loved ones drinking, drug use or gambling negatively affects their working life, with 6% needing to take time off or reducing their hours, 6% having to take sick leave more frequently, and 22% struggling to concentrate or having a lower level of productivity whilst at work. And just under half of those surveyed felt that they had been disadvantaged in some way because of their family member or friends drinking, drug use or gambling. The most frequently cited disadvantages were financial at 24%, health at 20%, and employment 14%. Given the need, given the scale of this issue and what we feel is a lack of recognition and understanding of it, we asked family members themselves what their views were on whether the recognition is there, both amongst the general public, the media, and the government. 23% of affected family members thought the potential harms caused by drinking, drug use, or gambling were given sufficient attention and recognition across the media, with 56% saying that they thought that they were not. 24% of affected family members think this issue is sufficiently recognised amongst the general public. 53% said that they felt that it was not. And 9% of affected family members felt that the national and local government was doing enough to provide services, whilst a whopping 63% felt that more was needed to be done, both across national and local government. And of those family members who felt more was needed to be done by national and local government, we asked them what they felt should be done. And 50% said more information and awareness for family members on how to cope and where to get support was vital. Furthermore, 49% said greater availability of support services for people who engage in behaviours such as drinking, drug use or gambling was needed, whilst 47% said greater availability of services for the friend or family member negatively affected by these behaviours. And 48% said that better coordination was needed amongst and across frontline health services to support people who drink, use drugs or gamble, and the impact that has on families and friends. So the report is obviously available to download on our website, and in that report, we outline all of the key findings in full. And at the end, we set out our recommendations for how we can improve the situation for family members and friends and get better recognition and better support. So we recommend that there is an increase in services to support children and adults affected by a loved one's substance misuse or gambling. We call that we should ensure that where services are available, families and friends of people with a drug, alcohol or gambling problem are referred appropriately. To ensure that families and friends who have vital caring responsibilities are recognised and supported financially, emotionally and practically, and ensuring that family members of people with drug, alcohol and gambling issues are included in all relevant parliamentary inquiries and policy making. And just to finish, I'm going to read out a quote from Dan Carden MP for Liverpool Walton and an ambassador for AdFam. As Viv mentioned earlier, unfortunately, Dan wasn't able to make it to today's meeting, but Dan has done an amazing job at highlighting this issue across Parliament by bravely and honestly sharing his own experience of alcohol dependency and the impact it has had on his life and of his families. I'm going to read out this quote that he shared with us. Addiction is a national crisis and an illness that devastates entire families. So much care and attention is given to the person who is struggling with their addiction. Meanwhile, the growing needs of families can go unmet. All too often, the trauma, anxiety, financial stress and stigma experienced by family and friends are overlooked. The findings of this report are truly shocking. It is estimated that there are over 5 million families who are dealing with the negative impacts of a family or friend's substance use problems and gambling. The sharp decline in family support services has left too many families trying their best to manage a desperate situation without the right help. This government must acknowledge the harms addiction causes families through urgently reinvesting in family support services. As a proud ambassador for AdFam and someone in recovery from alcohol addiction, I wholeheartedly endorse the recommendations set out in this report. I'm grateful to AdFam for their tireless work in advocating for the thousands of overlooked families in the UK. So as I say, you can download the report on our website, and we would really encourage you to share the findings as widely as possible. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll now hand back to Viv.
Thanks very much, Rob. And do begin to, if you have questions and comments, to put them in the chat, and Megan will be filtering those through. I'm now delighted to hand over to James. James is one of our members of our lived experience advisory group and has been a supporter of AdFam for a long time. And he is now going to tell us something, tell us his story. So James, thank you for agreeing to be with us. I know this is not always easy, and I hope you know how much we appreciate you doing this, not just on behalf of AdFam, but on behalf of everyone affected in this way. So over to you, James. If you unmute, you need to unmute, that's the problem. Now, there you are.
That's right. Yeah. Thank you, Viv. My name is James Hill. My son, Ian, suffered from poor mental health and addiction for about 10 years. As a consequence, it led to his death by suicide last year. I've been invited to speak about my lived experiences of those times. But before I do, anything I say could be replicated 1,000 times by 1,000 different people with similar stories to mine. I will be speaking as a father, but it could just so easily be a mother, a daughter, a sister, an uncle. There's a universality about all of our stories. And what I've tried to do is condense my experiences of those times into what I see as some key memories or experiences. And I'll talk about them, and after that, talk a little bit about what made a difference during those times. So the first memory I have was one of isolation or alienation. And I'd like to illustrate that with the use of a very simple question. And it's a question that certainly for those of us with children, most of us actively look forward to. In my case, I used to dread it. But the question is a simple one: how are the kids? For most of us, it's a chance to say something like, well, my daughter was top of the class, or my son made the football team, or some such answer as that. But in my case, if I was telling the truth, it would be an answer that went something along the lines of, well, last night, my son stole money from me. And the night before that, he was in A&E after taking an overdose of some substance. And is he working? No, he can't work. I came to make the conclusion that anybody I was speaking to or answering that question to would be thinking, well, what's going on in that house? An apple surely doesn't fall too far from the tree. And what's he doing about it anyway? Why doesn't he just kick him out? As though that was some magic wand I'd been missing. So I came to learn not to engage with that question. And I came to live what seemed an isolated life compared to everybody around me who was seemingly living a normal life. The second memory I have was one of confusion. Because what exactly was I doing about it? It seems to me we live in a world where there's seemingly an answer to everything. If you look hard enough, try hard enough, you'll get an answer. In my case, I just recently sold a business and I had lots of money in the bank. I could afford any psychiatrists, therapists, rehabs, acupuncturists, a whole list of people, and I did. And I had also retired, so I had all the time I needed. And I read every book I could. I listened to every podcast I could to turn myself into an expert on addiction. And furthermore, and maybe most significantly, I had a son who actually wanted to engage with all this and get better. Ian loved therapy. And yet, despite all these advantages, it often seemed there were no easy answers, and sometimes no answers at all. And that led to a constant state of confusion. The third memory I have was one of anger. I used to ask myself over and over again, what had I done to deserve to be in this position? Watching my son's life disintegrate around him. And at the same time, destroying what up till then had seemed the cozy dynamic of our family life. Meal times in our house had always been happy occasions, full of laughter and banter. But when addiction came into our life, it seemed as though someone had thrown a hand grenade into the room. We all stopped talking. We all retreated into our own certainties, each of us believing we knew what the problem was and how to solve it. As it turned out, we were all wrong, but it meant we had stopped communicating. The fourth memory I have was one of shame. I don't think I'm alone in judging my life, not on its career successes, sporting successes, relationship successes, although on the way there have been one or two, as has been the case with all of us. The significance of being a good parent, and yet here I was every day, waking up, looking in the mirror and asking myself the question, how could you have allowed that to happen? And even though my rational mind tried to answer that question, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, I was always left with this sense of shame. So what made a difference? Well, in my case, 3 years into my story, somebody suggested I look for support. And I actually got that support through AdFam. But at the time, the word seemed laughable to me. I couldn't understand how it could possibly apply to me. Sure, I could understand how it applied to my son, but I was fine. Why did I need support? Luckily, I wasn't 100% arrogant, maybe 95, but not completely. And it then led me to have 12 sessions with a family support worker. And during those sessions, I learned many, many things like enabling, boundaries, coping with conflict. But perhaps most important of all, and unexpectedly, that the main thing that made the difference was that it took the focus away from my son and onto myself. And as a result, helped me with a greater sense of well-being in my life and the opportunity to live a more positive life. And as a consequence, being able to offer my son a much better context in which to live his life. After that, it was suggested I join support groups. And when I went to the support groups, I was open-mouthed with disbelief at all the people I met who had similar stories to mine. It was such a relief in many ways to meet people whose lives, who could swap similar stories to mine, and in a sense that validated my life. And we could share how to make things better together. We could sometimes even laugh at our own experiences, but somehow it left a sense of being normal as opposed to being abnormal. That was that whole aspect of receiving support changed me as a person. I was better able to change the dynamic in my family and change the conversation in my family as a consequence. It meant that we were able to offer Ian a better place of empathy rather than judgment, and a place of safety instead of fear. And perhaps the most important realization of all, that there is no such thing as a happy addict. And this, in a sense, was the great takeaway from my experience, the opportunity and the possibility the family has to change and make a difference in stories like ours. And it seems to me this is the great untapped resource that the policymakers don't take into account sufficiently enough. A very simple offer of support to a family can make a difference beyond all the experts that might be out there in a professional capacity. So I feel perhaps I've talked enough or too much, so perhaps I'll stop now. And in stopping, thank you very much for listening to my shared experience, lived experience.
Thank you very much indeed, James, much appreciated. We now move on to our Q&A. We already have some, well, one or two questions, and I'm going to try and field those as best I can. The first one I'm going to give to Rob, because Rob was my colleague who actually dealt with all the statistical issues around the survey. And the question is actually about how does YouGov work, Rob, in terms of how it gets its stats, and how are they validated? I hope I'm not paraphrasing too much. I think that's the essence of Charlie Lowe's question.
Sure, thanks, Viv. Yeah, so YouGov has a sample of what do you call them? Volunteers, if you like, who contribute to surveys that they put out on a regular basis, and the sample is representative of adults in Great Britain. So you can identify trends and statistics that are representative of what it's like to as adults in Great Britain. So for example, this survey was sent out to the 2,000 people on their sample list, and by asking those 2,000 people, I think 220 came back saying that they had been negatively affected by the drug, alcohol, gambling problem of a family member or friend. So we've taken from that based on their national representative sample, that 11% of adults in Great Britain we estimate to be negatively affected by the substance use of a family member or friend. In terms of how they recruit those people, I'm afraid I'm not able to answer that. But YouGov, a highly reputable polling company, do all sorts of different work in all sorts of different areas, from political polling to a range of social issues. like the one that we're looking at with substance use and the impact on families. And they, produce data all the time with national trends and nationally representative data. So we're very kind of confident in the data that's come out of that, and that the estimate is nationally representative. And it very much corresponds, as you'll find with our survey from 2 years ago, obviously finding that 1 in 10 adults were currently negatively affected by the substance use of a family member or friend. This time, that 11% being currently negatively affected by the drinking, drug use, or gambling of a family member or friend.
Thanks, Rob. And a supplementary question to that is, we didn't find out about children affected, did we? Though it's something we would very much like to do.
Yes, exactly. So this is specifically adults. And as you say, Viv, yeah, there will be many more children as well that are affected. So to say 5.5 million people are currently negatively affected by someone else's drinking, drug use, or gambling, the actual figure is a lot higher because that doesn't include children.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. And there was a question about a comment, I think, which I entirely endorse, about how we need to work with as many professional practitioners as possible, because this is a problem that's everybody's business. And I think the comment is that too few, and I perhaps don't know if James would like to comment on this, often too few GPs, ambulance responders, people on the ground, health and social care workers on the ground don't always get this. They don't always see what the issues are for families. I don't know if you've got any comment on that, James, in your experience, if that was something that happened to you, that you felt everybody should be more aware of this issue.
Well, my experience, there was no recognition.
Yes.
I mean, literally none. And in a way, I would almost say, why would there be? Because if you go to a GP, the GP is treating the individual person who's in front of them. They're not looking beyond that to what impact it might have on a family. And the same with drug services, the same with mental health services. There was never any, in my experience, any recognition of that, or never any recognition of the opportunity for the family to make a difference. That was always something that surprised me so much. That was such a, seemed to me, obvious first resource. If a family was better educated to help, most of us, I wasn't when I started my journey. I'm sure there's still masses I could learn, but if I had been better educated, I could have, and maybe would have made a much bigger difference. But it just seems to me that it's a resource which isn't considered.
Yeah. And then we have, yes, keep putting things in the chat, everybody, thank you. A question about, and I don't know what the answer, my answer is going to be, I don't know what the answer is. It's from Joe Huey about how can we motivate a government to do something about this when they have so much to gain financially, when there's so much financial gain from alcohol and from gambling revenue. And I have to say, I really don't know. We have to keep on banging the drum for what we're trying to do. We have to keep on making the case, but whether or not that will ever change in the current way that society is structured, I don't know. I don't know if you've got any comment, Rob, on that, or
I completely agree. I think it's all about awareness raising and people like Dan who shared his own experience and kind of brought this within Parliament is really vital. And people and of course, James, thanks so much for sharing your experience on the meeting this afternoon. And I think people sharing their experiences is such a kind of powerful way of raising awareness and reaching kind of policymakers and getting them to kind of really understand the issues and what families are going through. Yeah, it's a real challenge getting government to take notice and do something, but certainly anyone that kind of shares their experience makes a massive impact in terms of that awareness raising.
Thanks, Rob. probably ask James to comment on this one. We've had several questions from people who are setting up support and supporting others in their local communities, local areas, around how we can actually, how can we reach out to families? How can we identify, how are they identified? How can we raise awareness of their, how can we raise awareness of the support that is available, limited in, as you know, we might argue it can be, but how can we reach out? Because that is often such a problem, because of the prejudice and shame that we've identified and talked about this morning. But I wondered if you had any ideas, James. You know, how did you come across support in the first place?
Well, you're absolutely right. That is extremely difficult bridge to cross. I used to, a few years ago, work in a drug drop-in centre, purely with the on a voluntary basis, just to try and engage family members when they came in with their loved ones who had a substance abuse problem, just to try and engage with them, talk to them, and try and signpost them to whatever help might be available. And I would say 9 times out of 10, whoever I went to talk to wouldn't talk to me. They would make every excuse under the sun not to talk to me. And it took an awful lot of patience and an awful lot of time to win their trust, essentially. And once I'd won their trust, then they were often delighted to find out about support groups or the various things that were available. But it is an extremely difficult thing to do, because most people think the problem's going to go away, and they think the problem's not their problem, it's the family member's problem, not the substance abuse problem, not their problem. So it's a huge challenge to do it, and it isn't an easy thing. And yet, when it happens, it has huge consequences and huge rewards. So I wish I could give you some clever program that would make this happen. But I certainly recognize its usefulness if it could be made to happen.
And a supplementary to that, James, a question for you. Given that you've shared your story today, how were you supported to do that, and how can family members be supported to share their stories?
Well, I think the support groups are a huge one, because if you're part of a support group, you don't feel isolated, and you feel your life has sort of been normalized to some degree, and you come to realize the problem is much bigger than just yourself. I think most people start off in these stories thinking they're the only one, but in fact, the more you talk about it, the more you come to realize almost anybody you meet has got some sort of connection with substance abuse, so you're not alone. But the support groups, I think, are a fantastic resource and a fantastic opportunity to feel normal in your life. Yeah, how you reach out to them, though, that is the $4,000 question.
Yes, I mean, and I guess, you know, one of the ways is certainly social media, but we have to accept not everybody is comfortable with that. And another way is referrals from the local drug and alcohol treatment service. But again, if you get referrals through that route, you're only reaching the family members who have somebody who's in treatment. And I know you and I have talked about this before, James, that this is, for you, this was something that I think that's how you came across AdFam in the first place, but that was kind of lucky, in inverted commas. So, you know, referrals from carers services, but that does demand a lot of local working, a lot of work at local level to establish partnerships.
Yeah, I don't know whether everybody on this forum knows about the work that AdFam commissioned a few years ago and that I was part of, which was this attempt to start what came to be known as Family Champions. And at the time, I thought if it was something that it only actually happened, it was trialed in my borough, but it seemed to me an extremely good idea. And if it had been rolled out across the country, I think could have made a huge difference. But how it worked was that myself and I don't know, 6 or 7 other people were given training just to try and engage with family members and encourage them to get support, get into the system of support, and sort of almost be an advocate for them. So often when I was trained to do this, and I did it, I was saying earlier, by working in the drug drop-in center, I got to meet a lot of people who ended up trusting me to, if they had a problem, they felt they could talk to me because I had been trained, I'd been sort of authorized, if you like, and it was somebody they could refer to. Whereas in the normal course of events, there's no one. In fact, my main experience of starting off on this journey was there was just no one to turn to. There was plenty of people for my son to turn to, but absolutely no one who had a listening ear for me. And it would have saved an awful lot of heartache if that had come my way a lot earlier than it did.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm just looking to see if we have any more questions. Or Rob, did you want anything to add to that? Because we've got a lot of, CGL stands for Change, Grow, Live. It's a big a big provider of drug and alcohol services. So I don't know, is there, Megan, are there any more questions? There are a lot of comments, but I know they're in the chat, so please do read those. Rob, anything you want to add?
Can I add one more thing?
Please.
Well, it's just an illustration. I could probably come up with 100, but this one, I always remember this one. And it is the difference between when you're living with somebody has substance abuse problems, the difference with relating to them in a way that's going to help, as opposed to relating to them in a way where it's clearly not going to help. And the lessons that I was given as the consequence of ADFAM, that these sessions I had with a family support worker, one of the things I learned, many of you think it's a very obvious one, but it wasn't to me at the time, was not to be angry when my son did something totally crazy, as I saw it, but to be empathic. And when I fully learned that lesson, it changed so much of what happened in our house. But for many, many years, I thought my anger was justified and reasonable. And I thought even in some way it was going to change the story. Sooner or later, the penny would drop. But I came to realize anger actually was almost the worst thing that could have been in that particular situation. And empathy, which was almost, it seemed to me, the opposite, was much more likely and did open up a conversation and allow for a space where things could change as opposed to never changing. So that's just one thing I learned. There were hundreds. If I'd learned that from a very early stage, I think I would have offered a much better context for my son's life. But I didn't know that then. And it just seems to me that sort of education is could make such a difference.
Thank you. And there was a question about you mentioned becoming a family champion. Yes, we could still do that training. And I think Rob and Megan will look at perhaps putting that on Zoom and doing that, because it seems to me there's such a lot of support, so many people out here at this webinar today, over 142 participants, so many of you working in this sector, working locally and beyond to support families. And we need, AdFam, we can respond to that need to provide that training. So and if there were more family champions, then that grows the support and it spreads the word, doesn't it? I'm just going to have a look to see if there's any more questions. I don't think so. Are there, Megan? Am I right?
So there's a couple, so there's one from Valerie. So Valerie
Please, go
asked,
ahead, Rob, please go ahead.
is there a way of bringing all the small groups together to lobby Parliament, power in numbers?
Yes, and I was going to, thanks for the question, because I was going to raise this. Because of our response to the Dame Carol Black report, when we wrote to all MPs to say, no mention of families, where are they? Come on. And many of you, several of you here today, many of you here today actually came to our meeting about that and helped us to frame that response and to sign up and support it. We'll be taking that forward, and we'll be taking this report forward. We'll be sending it to as many MPs as we can, officials in government, and would encourage you to send it to your local MP, to write a letter to your MP, to support it. And all being well, I don't know whether it be before Christmas, but certainly early in the new year, we'll be putting together a meeting of family support groups, because what we're beginning to develop is a very sort of loose coalition, I don't know what the word is, coalition, alliance of family support groups. So I think that, you know, together we can be stronger, support each other. And so AdFam will be in touch with you all to see if you could join that coalition. And because there's, well, I think, yeah, there's strength in numbers. Megan is saying to everybody, if you're a support group, you can add your logo to our website. Please look at our website and look at the resources there. Rob, are there any more questions?
Yeah, so another question from Hazel. So Hazel says, it's great to hear from James that the AdFam support groups work well as the kind of listening ear, as James says. What other kind of supports could local authorities be commissioning or doing to help?
Well, I don't know. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? That we need family support services to be included in tenders. When tenders go out from local authorities for drug and alcohol treatment, we need family support to be included in that. Having said that, I'll go back to the point that we made about that would mean that it may only be families who are whose loved one is in treatment that are able to access that support, and that might be limited. So we do need, I think, local authorities across the board to be aware of this. I mean, we could do something with our training, and to be fair, we do have a big variety of professional group practitioners who come to our training, social workers, health workers, to people who work in prisons, probation, criminal justice, across all those sectors. So we're trying to raise awareness so it's everybody's business. Every practitioner knows how to work with. If they come across a family affected, then they know how to work with that family. So they can offer support. But I think we need real structural change. We need family support to be included, not just in the drug and alcohol tenders, because it's not just about drug and alcohol treatment. It's about the whole healthcare and social system. I don't know if you've got any comment on that, James, and or Rob. Just my thoughts.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm not. I don't have any experience of policy making, and I'm not sure how these things work. I'd love to think that local authorities could allow facilities or some money to be available for support groups to make it easier for them to flourish.
Yeah.
But it does have to come from
Yeah.
somebody has to instigate it and organize it. I'm not quite sure how that structure could come about.
Yes, I mean, I remember it's quite a while ago now, but when I first started working at AdFam, there were family support groups across the country in most areas, and they were often funded sometimes by trusts and foundations, but often by the local authority. They were commissioned specially, but then I'm afraid that has fallen away over the years. So many groups, and it's great that there's so many still here, and you're still here, and you're still working. But so many did, I'm afraid, suffer from lack of funding, not being recommissioned. and or were taken over by treatment providers. And I mean, I've made some remarks about family work within treatment providers. Some of it is absolutely brilliant, and I know there'll be some of you here today who work for big treatment providers, and your work is fantastic. But it's not always the case, and sometimes, unfortunately, I think drug and alcohol specialists are asked to work with families, and it's not given the recognition. It's a bit of a Cinderella service then, isn't it? Don't know if Rob's got anything to add to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, going back to the challenges around what local authorities can do. And as you say, you know, Viv, that there used to be kind of family services commissions across the board. And it is such a challenge with the financial constraints that local authorities are up against at the moment, and the lack of kind of funding from central government. But it's still really important that support is available for families, and it is so kind of patchy, and this is the term, you know, postcode lottery, and it is so much the case that it does very much depend where you live as to whether support is available. I've noticed a few kind of questions in the chat, actually, people kind of asking if we know of support available in specific areas. I think Bristol and South Manchester. If you have any kind of questions like that, please do drop us an email, and be happy to kind of help find if there is kind of local support that you can potentially signpost family members towards. If you email us, we'll put our email in the chat.
And if you're offering support and you're not on our website, please let us know, because we can make sure that it's on our website. Megan, are there any more questions? There's no end of comments in the chat. Are we able to let everybody have those afterwards? Are we, Rob? Let people have the comments? No more questions, but is there a way, can we send them? I think we can send you all the slides from Rob's presentation.
Yeah, sure. And if anyone wants to save the chat, if you go at the bottom right hand of your screen, there's 3 dots in the chat function. So click that and then select Save Chat, and then you have a record of all of the comments and questions that were asked and written across today's session. Thank you.
Well, we're about on time, so it's just up to me, or down to me, just to wrap up. Thank you very much, Rob. Thank you, Megan, for making this all work. Thank you, James, again, for your input. And thank you to all of you. Thank you for supporting us. Thank you for supporting our cause and your cause. We will be in touch with the slides, and we will be in touch with you about our coalition of family support groups, so we can continue to fight the fight. It's great that so many of you are here today, including some people from overseas, so welcome. And if you had a question and we've not answered it, my apologies, but there was a huge amount of energy and activity on the chat function, so do look at that at your leisure or over your lunch. And thank you again so much for supporting us. Do promote the report as much as possible. That's what it needs, because we need to shout louder. And as I said before, the best way to shout is to shout together. So thank you, everybody, and have a good afternoon, and take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. We'll stay on for a minute. Can we stay on? And let's go. Yeah. Just stay on a minute. Mm-hmm.